The wind moved across the empty land, slow and heavy, carrying the scent of dust and dry grass. The sun was slipping down behind the hills, painting everything in gold and shadow. The rancher stood still, one hand on the wooden post by his gate, the other gripping the brim of his hat. He had worked that land his whole life. He knew the sound of every fence wire, every creak of the windmill. But that night something felt different. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was waiting. He heard her voice before he saw her, soft, low, and cracked from the road. "Don't take it off, just do it." The words hung in the air like smoke. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing as a figure came into view. A woman, covered in dust, her clothes torn, her face shadowed by the setting sun. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hands trembled as she held something close to her chest, wrapped in cloth, tied with a strip of leather. The rancher didn't move at first. Out here, strangers were rare, and words like that meant trouble. But the look in her eyes, part fear, part plea, made him step closer. The land stretched out behind her, empty and endless. Whoever she was, she hadn't come from anywhere near. When she reached the fence, she stopped. Her voice came again, lower this time, almost a whisper. "Please, just do it." She looked down, clutching the wrapped object tighter as if she was afraid to show it. The rancher glanced at her hands, then back at her face. He could see the dirt under her nails, the streaks of sweat and tears cutting through the dust on her cheeks. Whatever she'd been through, it hadn't been kind. He said nothing, just waited. The sky behind her turned deeper orange and the air grew colder. She took one step forward, crossing into his land, and for the first time he saw what she was holding. A small bundle, old cloth, worn thin. Something inside shifted when she moved. Her voice broke when she spoke again. "He said you'd know what to do." The rancher's chest tightened. He didn't know her, but the weight of her words felt familiar. Out here everyone carried something, guilt, loss, or memory. And sometimes the only way to survive was to face what others were too afraid to touch. The rancher didn't move for a long moment. The words clung to him like dust, heavy and strange. The woman's eyes wouldn't leave his. They were wide and hollow, like someone who had seen too much and stopped expecting kindness. She stood just beyond the fence, breathing hard, clutching that bundle as if it held her last hope. He cleared his throat, his voice rough from the dry air. "Who said that?" he asked. The woman looked down, her fingers tightening around the cloth. "He did," she said softly, "before it happened." The rancher's hand gripped the fence rail a little tighter. He didn't ask who she meant, not yet. Her voice trembled, and the way she said it told him enough. There was loss behind it. There was grief. The wind picked up, sweeping dust across the ground. The sky was deepening into shades of red and purple, the kind of sunset that came before a cold night. The woman glanced over her shoulder as if she expected someone to be following. No one was there, only the endless stretch of prairie fading into darkness. "Please," she whispered again. "He said you'd know." The rancher felt the knot in his stomach tighten. He looked at the bundle in her arms. It was small, too small to carry anything of real weight, but the way she held it, the way her arms shook, told him it was heavier than it looked. He stepped closer, the boards of the porch creaking beneath his boots. The horse in the corral shifted, snorted, then went still again. The whole land seemed to be holding its breath. "You'd best come inside," he said quietly. She hesitated, glancing around once more before she stepped through the gate. Her movements were slow, uncertain, like she was walking through water. The rancher led her to the porch, keeping a few steps ahead. The lantern by the door flickered in the wind, casting long shadows across the ground. When she reached the steps, she stopped again. Her voice came out weak. "It's not safe inside." He turned back to her. "Safer than out here." Her lips pressed together, but she followed. When she stepped into the light, he saw her more clearly, the dirt on her face, the small cut near her eye, the faint bruise along her jaw. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn at the hem. She looked like she'd been running for miles. The rancher opened the door, letting the warm light spill out from inside. The smell of wood smoke and coffee filled the air. She paused at the threshold, as if crossing it meant something she couldn't undo. Then she stepped inside. The cabin was simple: a table, 2 chairs, a small stove glowing faintly in the corner. She stood near the door, holding that bundle close. Her eyes darted around, like she was trying to memorize every way out. He poured water from a tin jug and set it on the table. "Sit," he said. "You look half dead." She didn't move at first, then finally sat down. Her hands never left the bundle. The rancher leaned against the counter, watching her. "What's in the cloth?" he asked. Her eyes flicked up to his, then back down. She shook her head. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me." Her throat moved as she swallowed. "He told me not to open it, not ever. Said if anything happened, I should bring it here, to you." The rancher frowned. "You keep saying he. Who are you talking about?" The woman's voice grew smaller. "Eli." The name hit him like a blow to the chest. He hadn't heard it in years. Eli, his old friend, his partner from before everything went wrong. They'd worked this land together once before Eli left without a word. The last he'd heard, Eli had gone north, chasing something that wasn't meant to be found. The rancher stared at her. "Eli's dead," she nodded slowly. "I know." The room fell silent except for the faint crackle of the stove. The rancher's breath came out heavier now, the memories rising like ghosts he'd tried to bury. He glanced again at the bundle. His voice was low when he spoke. "You said he told you to come here." She nodded again. "He said if I found you to tell you not to take it off, just do it." The rancher's jaw clenched. The phrase felt strange and familiar all at once, like a piece of something he'd forgotten. He pushed away from the counter and stepped closer to the table. The woman tensed, but didn't back away. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing the edge of the cloth. It was cold, damp with what felt like dried mud, or maybe blood. She gasped softly, clutching it tighter. "No," she said sharply. "He said not to take it off." The rancher froze, eyes narrowing. "And what happens if I do?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You'll see," she whispered. "But once you do, nothing will ever be the same." The room seemed to shrink around them. The flicker of the lantern made shadows crawl along the walls. The rancher pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, his eyes fixed on the bundle between them. He spoke quietly, his voice steady. "If Eli sent you here, it means something. He never did anything without a reason." She shook her head. "You don't understand. He didn't send me, he saved me, and he died for it." The rancher's brow furrowed. "Saved you from what?" Her voice cracked when she answered. "From the men who wanted this, from the ones who think it belongs to them." The rancher leaned back slowly, his mind turning. Out here, things like that had stories: cursed gold, stolen maps, secrets buried beneath the land. But the fear in her eyes wasn't superstition. It was real. The wind rattled the window and the lantern flame flickered. The rancher reached out again, his fingers brushing the edge of the cloth. The woman gripped it tighter, shaking her head, whispering over and over, "Don't take it off." He met her eyes, and for a moment neither of them breathed. Outside, the night had gone silent again, too silent. The kind of silence that comes when something is about to happen. The rancher's hand lingered over the bundle, his pulse beating in his ears. Whatever was wrapped inside, it had already taken lives. But he'd spent years running from his past, from what he and Eli left unfinished. Maybe this was where it came back to find him. The woman's voice broke the stillness one last time. "Please," she said, her eyes glistening in the lantern light. "If you do this, do it for him." The rancher looked at her for a long time, then at the bundle between them. His breath came slow. The air felt heavy enough to hold. He reached for the knot. The knot was tighter than he expected. The old leather strap didn't want to give, as if it knew what waited underneath. The rancher's rough fingers tugged, the sound of dry tension filling the air. The woman watched, her eyes wide and glistening, her lips pressed so tight they turned pale. The lantern light flickered over them, throwing shadows that stretched and twisted across the wooden walls. When the strap finally loosened, the woman let out a small sound, not quite a word, not quite a sob. The rancher hesitated. His hands rested on the cloth, still wrapped but trembling slightly from the weight of what he didn't yet understand. Something inside shifted just a little, a soft, dull movement that made his stomach knot. He looked up at her. "What's in here?" She didn't answer. She just shook her head, tears threatening to fall. Her voice was so quiet he barely heard it. He said it would find its way back. The rancher frowned. "What would?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. Only silence. It wasn't the silence of someone who didn't know. It was the silence of someone who did and couldn't bring herself to say it. The rancher sighed, the sound heavy in the small room. "If Eli sent this, I need to see it. I can't help you if I don't know what I'm dealing with." Her gaze met his. "You can't help it," she said. "No one can. You can only decide what to do after." He didn't know what she meant, but the fear in her voice told him she wasn't lying. He took a deep breath, fingers finding the edge of the cloth. Slowly, he peeled it back. The first thing he noticed was the smell, faint, metallic, and earthy, like iron mixed with soil. Then came the color, something dark and uneven beneath the folds. He opened it a little more, his hand steady but his heartbeat loud in his ears. Inside was a piece of metal, old, tarnished, shaped like a star. A badge. Eli's badge. The rancher froze, the air catching in his throat. It was still attached to a piece of torn leather, the kind worn on a belt. Dried blood stained its edge. He stared at it, the years collapsing in his mind all at once. He hadn't seen that badge since the night Eli rode off. Back then, Eli had been a lawman, chasing justice into places justice never reached. He looked at her again, confusion cutting through his shock. "Where did you get this?" The woman's hands trembled. "He still wore it," she said. "When I found him." The words hit him like a bullet. He gripped the table, the memory of Eli's face flashing before his eyes, the grin, the stubborn jaw, the last thing he'd said before leaving. "Some things you can't walk away from, partner." The rancher swallowed hard, voice low. "What happened to him?" She shook her head, her eyes full of ghosts. "He tried to protect me. They came for the badge. Said it wasn't just a piece of metal. Said it meant ownership over land, over people. He wouldn't give it up." Her voice cracked. "They killed him for it, but before he died he made me promise to bring it here. To you." The rancher's jaw clenched. His hand closed around the badge, cold and rough against his skin. The metal was heavier than it looked. It felt wrong, too warm, too alive. He turned it over, seeing the faint engravings on the back. A symbol he didn't recognize. He looked up. Who were they? Her eyes flicked toward the window. "The same men who own everything past the river. The ones who think they can take what they want because no one's left to stop them." The rancher stood slowly. The chair scraped across the floor. His pulse thudded like a drum in his chest. "You brought this here thinking I could finish what Eli started." She didn't answer. He took a step toward the door, running a hand over his face. He felt the years of exhaustion pressing down, the endless work, the quiet regrets, the weight of promises made long ago. "That fight died with him," he said finally. "Whatever this badge means, it ain't mine to carry." Her voice came sharp, desperate. "He said you'd say that." He turned. Her eyes were bright now, angry through the tears. "He said you'd tell yourself it's not your problem, that you'd hide behind your fence and pretend the world's too big to fix. But he also said you were the only man he ever trusted to do what was right, even when it hurt." The rancher stared at her, the fire from the stove flickering behind him, painting his face in red light. He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't know him, didn't know what this land had taken from him. But deep down, he knew she was right. Eli always saw through him, always knew he wasn't done fighting, even when he swore he was. He looked at the badge again, at the symbol on the back. It almost shimmered in the lantern light, faintly pulsing. He rubbed his thumb across it and felt something shift, a warmth, faint but real. The woman flinched. "Don't touch it," she whispered. "He said once it wakes, it can't be stopped." The rancher dropped it onto the table. The sound rang sharp and clear, echoing longer than it should have. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then somewhere outside, a sound broke the silence, the crunch of gravel, slow and deliberate. The woman's head snapped toward the door. "They found us." The rancher's hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning against the wall. He moved to the window, peering through the crack in the curtain. Out past the barn, two horses stood still in the half-dark, their riders shadowed by the moonlight. He couldn't see their faces, but he didn't need to. The stillness told him everything. He turned back to the woman. "You said they wanted the badge," she nodded, clutching her blanket close. His jaw tightened. "Then they'll have to take it from me." He grabbed the badge off the table and slipped it into his vest pocket. The metal burned against his chest like fire. He didn't know what it meant yet, but one thing was certain. Whatever Eli had started, it wasn't finished. And now, whether he wanted it or not, it was his turn to face it. The woman stood behind him, her breathing quick and uneven. "You don't understand," she said. "They'll kill you too." He glanced at her, eyes cold and steady. "Maybe, but they'll have to try." The wind outside shifted, carrying the creak of saddle leather and the low snort of a horse. The lantern flickered and the woman's shadow trembled across the wall. The rancher's hand rested on his rifle, his heartbeat calm and slow. Whatever waited beyond that door, it had come for the past, and he was done running from it. The air outside was thick and still, the kind that pressed against the skin and carried the faint taste of dust. The rancher pushed open the door just enough to look out. The night stretched across the land like a blanket, quiet except for the slow creak of saddle leather. Two riders sat still at the edge of his yard, dark shapes against the pale light of the moon. Their horses shifted restlessly, the sound of their hooves soft in the dirt. They weren't in a hurry. They were waiting. The woman stood behind him, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You can't face them," she whispered. "There's more than two." The rancher didn't turn. "There always is." He stepped out onto the porch, the wood creaking under his boots. The wind picked up just enough to make the lantern flicker inside the house. His rifle hung at his side, not raised yet but ready. The men didn't move. He could see their outlines now, one tall and broad, the other smaller, wiry. Their hats cast long shadows over their faces. One of them finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost polite. "Evenin', friend. Don't mean to trouble you. We're just lookin' for something that don't belong to you." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "You've come a long way for that," the man chuckled. "We came the right way, though. Lady came through here, pretty thing all dirt and fear, carryin' something she shouldn't have." The rancher didn't answer. He let the silence stretch, watching the way the taller man's hand drifted near his holster. "Now," the rider continued, "we don't want no blood tonight. Hand it over and we'll be on our way." The rancher shifted his stance, calm and steady. "You'll have to be clearer than that. I got a lot of things that don't belong to me." The smaller man spat into the dirt. "Don't play games, old man. We tracked her here. We know she brought it to you." Inside the house, the woman stood by the window, her breath quick and shallow. She could see the faint glint of the badge in the moonlight through the open door, catching against the rancher's vest. Her hands trembled. She knew what would happen next. Eli had told her this part too. The taller rider nudged his horse forward, the animal's hooves thudding softly in the dry earth. "It ain't worth your life, mister. Just give it up. That badge ain't what you think it is." The rancher finally spoke, his voice low. "I know exactly what it is. It's what's left of a good man." The taller man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That good man took something that wasn't his. That badge carries more than memory. It carries control." The rancher's grip on the rifle tightened. "Control over what?" The smaller man laughed. "You'll see if you live long enough." The tall one leaned forward in his saddle. "Last chance. We'll take it by hand or by gun, makes no difference." The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of dry grass and iron. The rancher didn't blink. His hand moved fast, not to raise the rifle, but to the pocket where the badge burned against his chest. The metal was warm, too warm as if it were alive. For a heartbeat he felt something strange, like the pulse of another man's heart beside his own. The riders stiffened, their horses snorting and stamping. The taller one's voice cracked through the air. "Don't you touch it." But it was too late. The rancher pulled it free, the dull silver glinting in the moonlight. The moment it hit the open air, the ground seemed to hum, a deep vibration that rolled through the dirt and into his boots. The horses reared, panicked, and the men struggled to control them. Inside, the woman gasped, stumbling back. She knew that sound. Eli had warned her about it, the awakening. The badge wasn't just a symbol. It was a marker, something old that had been forged to claim more than law. It was said to bind the land, to tie men to the soil they worked and punish those who tried to own what couldn't be owned. The rancher didn't know that story, not fully. All he knew was the heat against his skin, the strange pull inside him, and the way the riders' faces had turned pale under the moonlight. The tall one shouted again, this time with fear in his voice. "Drop it." Now the rancher's voice was steady. "What is it?" The smaller man drew his gun, the metal flashing in the dark. "It's a curse, you fool." The rancher didn't flinch. "Looks to me like it's yours." He took a step forward, and the ground seemed to follow him, a faint tremor rippling through the dust. The horses screamed and bolted, tearing against the reins. The taller man lost control and was thrown to the ground, landing hard. The smaller one fired a shot that went wide, ricocheting off the porch post. The rancher didn't raise his rifle. He didn't need to. The badge in his hand glowed faintly now, like iron fresh from a forge. The fallen rider scrambled to his feet, coughing, eyes wide with panic. "You don't know what you're doing," he yelled. "That thing don't belong to men like you." The rancher took another step forward, his boots crunching over the dry earth. The wind whipped through the yard, scattering dust around them. "Then tell me," he said quietly, "what kind of men does it belong to?" The smaller man hesitated. The tall one's voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "The kind already buried under it." Before the rancher could speak again, the two men turned their horses and rode hard into the night, vanishing into the dark horizon. Their shouts faded into the wind until there was nothing left but the creak of the fence and the distant cry of a coyote. The rancher stood there for a long time, the badge cooling slowly in his palm. The night had fallen silent again, the air heavy with the smell of gunpowder and dirt. He slipped the badge back into his vest pocket and turned toward the house. Inside, the woman waited near the table, her eyes wide with terror. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "It's awake now." He closed the door behind him, the sound of the latch echoing in the small room. "Then tell me what it wants." She looked at him for a long moment, her voice trembling when she finally spoke. "It doesn't want anything, it remembers." The rancher frowned, his mind turning over the words. "Remembers what?" She lowered her gaze to the floor. "Everyone who ever wore it, everything they ever did." The room seemed colder now. The rancher felt the weight of the badge pressing against his chest, pulsing faintly, like it had a heartbeat of its own. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands steady but his thoughts running wild. The woman sat down slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just a symbol of the law, it's the law itself, the kind that never dies, the kind that doesn't forgive." He stared into the dark outside the window. The land looked still, but he could feel something moving beneath it, something ancient and restless. The kind of thing you don't see until it's already too late. The badge pulsed against his chest all night, a slow heartbeat that didn't belong to him. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the faint echo of hooves in the distance, the sound coming closer, fading, then returning again. The woman didn't sleep either. She sat by the stove, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold, staring into the dim flame. The quiet between them wasn't peaceful anymore. It was a silence that listened back. By dawn, the light creeping through the windows was pale and weak. The rancher stepped outside, hat low, rifle slung over his shoulder. The land stretched out empty before him, as if nothing had happened the night before. But the tracks were still there, deep prints in the dirt, proof that the riders had come, and that maybe they hadn't gone far. He knelt to touch the ground, the soil still faintly warm from hooves. When he straightened up, the wind shifted and carried a voice from behind. "They won't stop now," she said softly. He turned. The woman stood in the doorway, her blanket draped over her shoulders like a cloak. The early light caught her face, showing the tired lines beneath her eyes. He nodded once. "I know." Her gaze dropped to the badge pinned to his vest. "You can still leave it behind," she said, "before it takes more." He looked down at it. The metal gleamed faintly, catching the sunrise like it was swallowing light. "Eli didn't die so it could sit in the dirt," he said. "If it's coming for me, I'll meet it halfway." She didn't argue, but her eyes said enough. She stepped aside as he walked past her, boots crunching over the frost. The barn stood at the edge of the field, its doors half open. The horses stirred restlessly, their breath fogging in the cold air. The rancher saddled his mare, his movements practiced and silent. Every buckle and strap sounded louder than it should have. When he was done, he turned toward the house again. The woman hadn't moved. "Where are you going?" she asked. He pulled the reins over his arm. "Where this thing started." Her voice trembled. "You mean north," he nodded. "Eli's trail ends there. Maybe the answers do too." She took a hesitant step forward. "They'll be waiting." "I hope so," he said. She looked at him like she wanted to stop him, but there was no stopping a man who had already decided. He climbed onto the horse, the saddle groaning beneath his weight. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the land in long shadows. The rancher touched the badge once more, feeling its strange warmth steadying under his hand. He didn't understand it, but he didn't need to. He'd lived his whole life by the land's rules. This was just another reckoning. He rode out slow at first, the sound of hooves soft on the frozen ground. The woman watched until he was a speck against the horizon. The farther he went, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind, not even the creak of the saddle. Just the steady rhythm of hooves and the weight of the past riding with him. The plain stretched wide and endless, the kind of emptiness that makes a man think too much. Every now and then, he thought he saw shapes moving along the ridges, distant riders, dark against the pale sky. He didn't chase them. They'd find him soon enough. By midday, he reached the old creek bed, dry now but still marked with scars from a flood years back. He dismounted and walked the last stretch, the sound of gravel crunching under his boots. The place looked familiar, too familiar. A cluster of blackened posts rose from the dirt where a house once stood. Eli's place, burned down long ago. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint smell of ash, even after all these years. He stopped beside the remains of the porch, his hand brushing a half-buried horseshoe. Memories came fast. Laughter, whiskey, the sound of cards on the table, and the promise of a better tomorrow that never came. The badge began to pulse again, stronger now, like it knew where it was. He pulled it free from his vest, holding it up to the light. The metal caught the sun, flashing like a mirror, and for a second he thought he saw movement inside it, faint, like smoke trapped under glass. Then he heard it, a voice low and broken. "Should have left it buried, Sam." The rancher froze. No one had called him by that name in years. He turned, but there was no one there. Only the wind and the remains of a dead man's home. He looked back at the badge, his throat dry. The voice came again, softer this time, closer. "You always were too stubborn to listen." It was Eli. The rancher's fingers tightened around the badge. "You died," he muttered. A faint laugh echoed around him, dry and hollow. "Maybe, but this land don't let go easy, not of me, not of what we did." The rancher's pulse quickened. "What did we do?" The wind howled through the broken posts, scattering dust across his boots. "We took what wasn't ours," the voice said, "and the land remembered." The rancher's mind raced back to the old stories, the deal Eli had made with men who claimed to own everything east of the river. He'd called it a contract, but it was more than that. Something about blood, something about binding the badge to the land itself. The law turned into something darker that night. The badge burned hot in his hand. He dropped it, and it hit the ground with a dull thud. The light around it dimmed, but it didn't stop glowing. He backed away slowly. "I didn't make that deal," he said. Eli's voice grew louder, almost angry. "You didn't stop me either." The ground shuddered beneath his boots, a low rumble rolling through the dry creek bed. He could feel the weight of something old stirring, not alive, but not dead either. The badge vibrated against the dirt, the light around it growing until it lit the charred posts like a fire. The rancher shielded his eyes, his breath coming in short bursts. "Tell me what it wants, Eli," he shouted. The voice dropped to a whisper. "It wants justice, the kind we buried with the truth." The rancher stared at the glowing badge, the air thick with dust and heat. He didn't know what justice meant anymore, not here, not now. But he knew one thing. The past had found him, and it wasn't finished talking. The sun rose weakly behind the hills, turning the sky a pale orange that spilled over the dry land. The rancher hadn't slept. The smell of smoke from Eli's burned cabin still clung to his clothes, the dirt from the night still under his nails. He stood by the edge of the creek bed, staring at the badge lying in the dust. It had gone quiet again, cold now, like an old wound closing just enough to ache. The air was still, too still, as if the earth itself was holding something back. The horse shifted behind him, snorting softly. The rancher turned, his hand brushing the stock of his rifle. Every sound felt sharper now. He could hear the grass rustling, the low moan of the wind, and then hooves. Slow, steady, measured. Not like the night riders. This was different. One horse. One rider. The figure came into view from the ridge, backlit by the dawn. The sun turned him into a shadow on horseback, tall and deliberate. The rancher watched, his jaw tightening as the shape drew closer. When the rider reached the edge of the burned foundation, he stopped. "You've got something of ours," the stranger said, his voice rough but calm. The rancher didn't answer right away. He picked up the badge from the dirt, brushing off the dust. "Seems everyone thinks that." The man dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. His coat was long, dark, trimmed with the same symbol etched on the back of the badge. The rancher noticed it right away, the mark that Eli had once called cursed. The stranger's eyes narrowed. "You touched it." "I had to." The man's expression barely changed, but something cold flashed behind his gaze. "Then you've made yourself part of it." The rancher gave a bitter half-smile. "Funny. I never signed up for nothing." "That don't matter," the man said. "That badge was forged with blood. Every hand that's held it's been marked. It don't care what you believe." The rancher stepped closer, his voice low. "Eli told me you'd come. Said you were men who think justice can be bought." The stranger tilted his head slightly. "Justice? No, friend, just balance. The badge keeps order. It remembers every debt. Eli broke the chain when he tried to take it for himself. And now it's looking for a new keeper." The rancher's grip on the metal tightened until his knuckles went white. The badge felt alive again, pulsing faintly in his palm. "I ain't keeping it," he said. "And I sure as hell ain't giving it back." The man smiled, slow and dangerous. "That's not how this works." He reached into his coat, pulling out a small piece of parchment, brittle and yellowed. The edges were burned, the words faded but still clear enough to read. "By the soil and the star, the law shall bind the land." The rancher stared at it. The writing looked like Eli's. "He signed it," the man said, "and now you carry what he owed." The rancher shook his head. "I don't owe you a damn thing." The man's eyes darkened. "You owe the land." Before the rancher could speak, the air around them changed. The wind stopped. The horses froze. Even the sound of the world seemed to pause. The ground beneath his boots trembled, faintly at first, then stronger. The burned posts of Eli's cabin began to creak, the wood groaning as if remembering its own pain. The rancher stumbled back as cracks split through the dirt, glowing faintly with the same light that pulsed from the badge. "What is this?" he demanded. The stranger didn't move. "It's the law waking up," he said simply. "And it don't forget." The rancher could feel the heat through his vest now, searing against his skin. He ripped the badge from his chest and threw it into the dirt. It landed between them, glowing brighter, the engraved symbol burning like fire. The ground shook harder, a low rumble building until it was all he could hear. "Make it stop," he shouted. The stranger stepped closer, his face illuminated by the glow. "Only the one who carries it can end it." The rancher looked down at the badge, the light spilling over his boots. He thought of Eli, of the woman, of the riders who came and went in the dark. The badge had taken everything it touched. Maybe that's what it wanted to keep taking until the land itself was empty. He reached for it again, his hand shaking. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, the world seemed to explode with light. A blinding flash swallowed the burned ruins, the horses, the stranger. For a second, everything vanished. Then it was quiet again. The rancher opened his eyes. The light was gone. The stranger was gone too, no sign of him, no hoofprints, no shadow. The only thing left was the badge, cold and dull, resting in the dirt. The land around it was different now, the cracks sealed, the ashes gone. The old cabin's foundation stood whole again, as if it had never burned. He picked up the badge slowly, feeling nothing this time. No heat, no pulse, no whisper, just metal. He slipped it back into his vest and looked toward the horizon. The sun was fully up now, spreading light across the plains. For the first time in a long while, the air felt clean. Behind him, the woman appeared on the ridge, her face pale in the daylight. She saw him standing by the cabin and hesitated before coming closer. "What happened?" she asked, her voice thin in the wind. He looked at her, then at the land that stretched endless and quiet. "I reckon it's done remembering." Her eyes drifted to the badge tucked into his vest. "And you?" He didn't answer. The land felt heavier beneath his boots, but his chest felt lighter somehow. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm, not peace exactly, but something close enough to live with. He mounted his horse again, pulling the reins tight. The woman stepped back as he turned toward the horizon. The prairie glowed under the morning sun, endless and waiting. As he rode off, the badge pressed cold against his chest. It didn't burn anymore, but it didn't rest either. It just existed, like the land itself, timeless and watching, waiting for the next hand that dared to claim it.